Okay, welcome. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you, Nick. You've worked so hard on this project, and I think it came out great. Just congratulations. It's, I think, really meaningful for me to do this project with you because we've worked together for 10 years now, almost 10 years, maybe 9 years, but always in the context of group exhibitions and single works integrated into broader themes. But it always felt kind of inevitable that a solo project would happen one day. So I'm really happy that it's finally come to pass, and that it's come to pass here in this building and in this gallery in particular. For those of you who haven't had a chance to see the show yet, here's this installation shot. It's in one of our project galleries. Specifically the one that's right upstairs at the top of the landing here to the right. The museum has 4 project galleries, and these are spaces that are dedicated to a single artist doing a single piece, usually site-specifically. Nick, I think you really engaged the nature of the architecture for this project. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, I think that was like one of the main ideas from the beginning of our conversation was to kind of do something that could only happen in that space.
Yeah. Maybe we can return to that, I think, as we go through. But the project consists of these 2 walls of concrete rings that look like they're levitating like magically, like by witchcraft or something. There's really an uncanny effect when you're walking through the space. There's a pair of these panels that are actually, what are all the materials exactly?
They're mainly carbon fiber, and then there's like spandex, cotton blend, 6XL t-shirts that are stretched on the surface that are kind of soaked or rubbed with chlorine. And then the whole thing is vacuum bagged for 24 hours to kind of squeeze it and turn it into this like thin thing that you see there.
Yeah, they're very, very stiff and hard, but very, very fine. And they have a way of kind of floating against the wall. And
then the back is laminated with Velcro. So yeah. The entire back is this kind of solid Velcro sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, every element of the project seems to kind of really engage the architecture at the same time that it kind of hovers in front of it, like almost detached from it. It's an interesting effect. And then there's another element that's installed just outside the entrance of the gallery, which is this. This is actually the mold that Nick used to create the rings, and that kind of gets us into the question of the process, which is really the heart of this project. Nick, do you want to kind of walk us through how you made these things?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the kind of the proposal that I really gave to you to begin with was really just a proposal for a process more than like a finished thing. So that's kind of what we started with, I guess. So this kind of Medusa head thing that you see kind of coming in and out of the water is it's kind of a mother mold. So it's this half of a molding system where the other part is this soft rubber mold, and you can kind of see it in action there. So when you have a soft rubber mold to have a lot of detail, you need a mother mold to kind of keep it stiff. And so I kind of wanted to do this 2-sided idea where like the mother mold would be this kind of like garden statuary thing, and then the other side would be this super industrial kind of object that would pop out. And
so then you basically inserted this dry concrete mixture into this mold, and then just allowed it to absorb the water. And
yeah, I mean, that was the idea, but it, as things go, it's never that simple. Mm-hmm. So like, that was how it started, but there were all kinds of like weird quirks to the process. So like, I mean, I can honestly say that like every single ring has its own sort of like weird requirements, and each one was its own kind of experiment. I did do a couple of rings that way where the powder went in dry, but what happened was it just took a lot of time. Like it takes a lot longer to sort of harden and for the chemical reaction to take hold. So a lot of different things happened.
Well, so then eventually they would set, and then this is you.
That's
I'm
actually
sorry, yeah.
somebody else. He told me he didn't want to be like.
Didn't want to be identified.
Yeah.
Anonymous assistant. And so then the next step is that you peel away this rubber mold, right?
Right. So once the concrete sets, then you just demold it, and then you kind of want to let it dry out in the sun. So you kind of bake it in the sun to get the moisture out of it. When it's still wet, it's kind of soft. I mean, not soft, but it's kind of could break much more easily.
I like this picture in particular because it shows how you integrated some of the tiles that kind of came off of the pool, right? Did they come off? Or did you help them come off?
Is your mic?
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? All right.
Yeah, so, well, the pool is like this whole kind of weird context in and of itself. It's actually like a Titanic-themed mosaic pool. So and I mean, when I say Titanic, I don't really mean the ship, I mean the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio.
You can
Kate
see a
Winslet.
little bit of it in the corner there. There's this like elaborate imagery.
Yeah. So there's all this glass tile in there, and it's kind of like it's not aging all that well, conceptually and materially. So
and, like aesthetically, yeah.
So it's sort of every day like shedding these tiles that are just ending up sort of everywhere, and then of course like really quickly the idea came up to put these in the concrete and start to like cast them into the whole process.
What's happening in this picture?
That was another additive, Burger King French fries. And then, afterwards, the ring gets kind of saturated with chlorine, and the chlorine breaks down all the starch in the French fries, and they just kind of crumble out, and you have these like French fry fossils.
Yeah, they're fossils.
And then, I had to do some shrimp.
Yeah, had to do the shrimp. This is an interesting experiment.
Yeah, that didn't work out, actually.
No, it's too bad. I was really excited when I heard about the pizza.
That was like a little bit too far. And yeah, that attracted like animals and stuff too. It was like this big kind of
And it
disaster.
didn't hold up like structurally or something?
Yeah, like I think the bottom line is that I wanted to do it in a pizza box because like if you're gonna cast pizza, you might as well do it in the box it came in. The box wasn't thick enough, so the walls didn't get thick enough to like sustain it. And then maybe it could have been done in a bigger kind of like block of concrete, but it just wasn't fitting into the show. So,
Yeah.
And it was really gross. Like the oil started like seeping out, and the cheese was doing this weird stuff. So.
Well, there's another element to this project, which was, a little bit scary for us, but really exciting, I think. And I think the results are really beautiful. But can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so this is something that, we kind of like skirted around for a really long time. And then, I have to thank you for kind of like helping make this happen, because I was skeptical that it could happen. You guys like went a little bit further than I thought to make this possible. So, the idea was to take pool chemicals and then put them on the wall of the gallery, which is solid poured concrete. In this case, this is hydrochloric acid, which is used to sort of balance the pool water in a very diluted fashion. But when you have it undiluted, it's extremely, caustic.
Yeah.
So the idea was to make like an etching on the wall of the gallery with this acid, and it actually worked out, pretty good.
Nick is on a genie lift here. This is the actual etching is maybe about 10, 11 feet up in the air. So when you go see the project, you'll see. This is just to give a sense of the results that I think are really beautiful. You know, they have kind of the quality of a ruins.
Yeah, it's almost like paint that flaked off or something.
Yeah.
Or like lead or something. Like,
Yeah. Or like a Greek temple or something that has been abandoned, or for that matter, like a kitschy pool that has been abandoned for a long time. Which,
yeah, that design is something you would find on the edge of the pool, kind of.
Yeah. But when you're standing in the space, it's almost as if you're standing at the bottom of an empty pool. So, I mean, the use of the hydrochloric acid, the use of the molds, the use of the vacuum pump, the pool pump that you use to vacuum pack the panels, etc. I mean, clearly you're using the elements, the processes, and the materials that are kind of native, that are inherent to the setting that you selected, right? I think that's a key aspect of the piece. You restricted yourself as much as possible. Is this cutting in and out? Is this annoying people? I keep hearing it cutting in and out, sorry. So that's a key aspect of the piece, I think. And it's something that runs through a lot of your work. And I think we can, the next step I think is going to be to go through some of your earlier projects that, particularly the ones that involve that kind of approach. But I did want to show this image. This is one of the images that we talked about.
Yeah, this is kind of like a source. Like when we first started talking about the project, I was looking at this kind of stuff. And so this is, obviously it's a pool that's being constructed, and there's this like formula for concrete called gunite, and it's a formula that lets the concrete be shot through this kind of tube, and it makes these like small, smooth walls. And so like some of the like chemical stuff that's going on with that specific type of concrete, I adapted to the rings to make them like very, thin and light and very, relatively very strong.
So even down to the particular mixture of the concrete, really hewed close to the kind of requirements suggested by the pool.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to stick with.
Now, as far as the look, the forms, in particular, like what kinds of things were you thinking of?
Yeah, well, so the rings are, I got this like engineering spec sheet, sort of like a general guideline if you want to start making storm drains, or if you're plugging them in here and there in your town or city. And I wanted to see like how small I could get and still allow the human body to get through. So if you have like a manhole access, or like if you have a culvert or something, entrance to a storm drain system that people have to get into to like do maintenance or whatever, that's pretty much about as small as you can get according to this like spec sheet. So using those specs, I kind of designed this like super small like sliver of a much bigger storm drain piece, and that's what ended up being the item or the object. So
the forms relate directly to this idea of infrastructure, specifically water infrastructure, and the tie to the pool arises right there, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, it's kind of like to me, it's like a figurative sculpture, right? I mean, it's all based on the dimensions of the human body, so it's just like it's like a figurative sculpture without actually showing the figure. But I think that like a swimming pool is the same thing, right? It's like implies the human body. I mean, that's the only kind of use that it's supposed to have, but it looks like something else. I mean, it has, some of them have these biomorphic like bean shapes and stuff like that. But there's this relationship of forms that I'm pretty interested in.
At the same time, these kinds of forms of infrastructure, these are just examples of other kinds of storm drains. they're quite severe. Like I think there's something in the use of that aesthetic, or in the use of the pool to produce objects of this aesthetic, that really creates this dissonance, right? This discrepancy between the idea of leisure and the idea of production of just hardcore nitty gritty.
Yeah, they're hyper-industrial
Yeah.
looking, and
they're beautiful in their own way, and definitely awesome in their original scale. We see these sometimes you'll see these being interred into the ground, particularly along 826 and 836. I don't know if you've been by there anytime recently, but these things are massive and really tremendously kind of impressive. And again, yeah, just beautiful in their own way. But I think it really gets to the heart of the project, of the heart of your goals with the project, which was to heighten the sense of conversion between leisure, something private, something for the body, into something that relates to industry, labor.
yeah, totally. And like, as we'll see a little bit in a couple slides, like I feel like Miami has been built on some of those ideas, but vice versa, right? So it's very industrial components that have been converted into like leisure use, right? So I just wanted to kind of reverse that for
So
this
you're
project.
reversing the process from.
Yeah.
And of course, when we just bring up the topic of water-related infrastructure in the city, that's a big can of worms. That's a very that's something that's on a lot of people's minds right now in a kind of an urgent way, right? Having to do with the issue of sea level rise, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really want the project to be like an alarmist kind of thing towards that. I mean, I think we all kind of have a sense of that. Like, I wanted to make the project just from like an assumption of like, yeah, this is the way things are, and then use it more as like a starting point than an ending point for the project.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's not. There was a moment while I was following your process where that became clear to me. It's kind of a subtle point. If I could just kind of paraphrase it a little bit, it's not about sounding the alarm about these issues that are kind of challenging and overwhelming our infrastructural situation here, as much as it is just kind of taking it for granted, taking it as a fact, and then converting it into something productive, just finding new ways to utilize sites like this.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, taking it for granted does kind of sound like a little bit.
Taking it as a given, I guess.
Yeah, taking it as a given. Like just taking a really long, hard look at like where we are right now and the kind of environment that I'm just working in and everyone's living in, and then just moving on, kind of. I mean, like I don't really want to engage like the ecological discussion that much. I mean, I'm interested in it, but I'm more of like a follower than a contributor, I think, to that discussion. I mean, it's just something that I'm sort of following. And I don't think that this project contributes to that discussion in a direct way.
Yeah, like it's not like you meant it like a symbolic representation of these problems.
Or even any kind of attempt to like remediate or deal with it, you know. It's more like the ship's going down, like let's, pop a bottle or something, like.
Well, what can we do with it? What
can we do now? Like, what do we do with what we have?
Yeah. So, to me, these kinds of infrastructural systems are interesting because they're so secret, because they're so.
Yeah, they're invisible, mostly.
They're invisible, yeah. And that kind of investigation is something that runs through your work, that has run through your work for a long time. This is a piece from 2006, so it's been
This is
been a
kind of
while.
around the time when we met and started having different conversations about work and stuff, right?
Yeah. Did you say this was the first piece that you did here in Miami?
Yeah, this is like the first. Yeah, this is the first project I did when I came back and was finished with school.
This is in the old Locust projects, the one in Wynwood. Some of you might remember. So what's going on here?
I mean, I guess the old Locust projects had this kind of apartment in the back where artists could live for a short time while they worked on their shows and stuff. And I was always kind of like, I guess, hanging around there. I didn't ever live in that apartment, but I was always like there at odd times and sort of talking to the people that did live there. And there was always this kind of like complaint or like sort of freak out about this electric substation that was right across the street, and everybody had this idea that they were getting these kind of electromagnetic disturbances and stuff while they slept, and things, and that it was messing with their brain waves and so on and so forth. So I guess the idea of the project was like how to map what that electromagnetic field would look like. And so this is really, I mean, it's a model, right? It's not full size, but it's like an architectural model, but instead of like a skyscraper, it's an electromagnetic field from the substation across the street.
And something kind of related is happening in this project.
Yeah, that
which
was
is
not too
in the
long
design
after.
district, yeah.
So that's it's like a, was it 70 or 40 feet long? I can't remember, but it was taking up the whole space, and it was made out of
Big. It
sheetrock.
was huge.
And it's just the space that planes take off and land at the airport. And it's the shape is based off a set of instructions that is given to pilots. So it's never really like drawn that way. It's more like a set of instructions that create a shape, and then it's installed to point at the actual runway.
So this is like the shape that pilots have in their heads as they're taking off from.
Yeah, they keep the plane within that sort of zone. It's called the glide slope. And the building happened to be under the glide slope and towards the end. So it's kind of like, you could step outside and see these planes.
And it was aligned along that that same route, or the primary route.
Yeah.
It's followed, right? You did a terrazzo, a smaller version in terrazzo, which is actually in our collection. This is an installation shot in the old building. But besides penetrating these kinds of obscure or invisible infrastructural civic networks, a lot of your work does the same thing, but with social, cultural networks, right? The earlier work, I think, tended to emphasize more underground or subcultural kind of situations, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I guess, an example of that. But it has, it has to do with building things too, like very much, because, so this is this project where I worked with this group called the Raelians, who want to build an embassy to welcome extraterrestrials. And the problem is that they want all of the airspace above the embassy to infinity. So that's kind of an issue, and they can't find a place to build the embassy. So working with them to sort of make maybe a very small step towards realizing this embassy that was very difficult to place on this planet, I built, along with a friend of mine who specializes in terrazzo, some tiles, some floor samples of what the floor of the embassy could look like, and it would sort of commemorate the different types of floor plans that they had throughout the years as they tried to get this embassy made. And the embassy still doesn't exist, but
when it does, it'll have your tiles on.
yeah, hopefully.
Beautiful, yeah.
I mean, that would be my dream.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you first started talking about this piece, you said that you probe these networks in order to build things, in order to make things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
Can
don't
you
really,
expand on
like, I don't know, probe is like kind of a really like intimidating word. Like, I don't really, You know, like.
Well, let's say,
Especially when you're
You're-
talking about extraterrestrials.
that's not intentional, but so, but you kind of wade into these contexts, or you contact these folks, and to
Yeah,
some
no,
degree
but I
build a
never,
relationship.
I never want to misrepresent myself. I mean, that's kind of like a rule that I have. It's like I don't want to come in under any kind of false pretense. And like for example, this project, I was like, well, how can we collaborate? And they were like, well, the best thing you can do is to join us, and then we'll take it from there. And then you'll be one of us. So whatever you decide to do will be a collaboration with the group. And I was like, well, that makes perfect sense. And, and so I did.
Do you still keep up with them?
Yeah, I mean, I still keep up with the email lists and stuff like that. The group is it's active here, but it's all over the world too. So.
Here's another example of your wading into a somewhat obscure network. No.
Yeah,
This is kind of a byproduct of that engagement that you had. So this came out of an application for DARPA.
Mm-hmm.
Right. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's essentially like the research wing of the Defense Department. And before you did this, I had never heard of an artist getting a grant from the Defense Department. So it was pretty unique and kind of interesting. Essentially it allowed you to kind of understand how research is carried out, at least through this entity, right? This is the same entity that developed the internet, that developed drones, some really major, and also some crazy kooky projects like weaponized insects and things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff going on over there. Yeah, well, this was kind of a collaborative thing, I mean, the whole premise of the residency was to get people together and to have them kind of cross-pollinate a little bit. So I was part of a team of people, like a few people, who went up there, and we had 2 months to kind of do a bunch of research and then do some presentations and interact with that entity and kind of see where we could go in a kind of an experimental way. And then, without getting too much into that, this is something that happened just afterwards with one of the people that I went up there with, Dylan Romer, who is a programmer and a kind of a visual information focus on his programming. And so we made this app that lets you manipulate sound in like a really tactile way. And it's called Purple Goo. And I think of it as kind of the ultimate result of this 2-month collaboration, even though it doesn't really, let's say,
like a one-to-one.
Well, it doesn't fit the purposes, right? Because, that residency was kind of supposed to produce certain results. This is not one of the results that was desired by the whole...
The U.S. military?
Yeah. This didn't really do much for
the
them.
military-industrial complex? Yeah. But I think it's a good example of how you work with these contexts. I mean, ultimately, the purpose is to produce artworks.
Yeah, always, right. Yeah. And that's also what happened with the Raelians, I mean, I joined them, but I said, I'm trying to make an artwork, and that's, if you guys think this is the best way to get to it, then I'm all for it. I'm always trying to get to something like that.
Yeah, I mean, when, I've asked myself, and I've asked you, why do you engage these systems? to produce objects. And once you said that in doing so, you end up with very alien-looking objects. Like the effects themselves often have a very strange, kind of esoteric aspect that maybe you would not have been able to reach had you just been, enclosed in the studio by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that to me is everything. Like that's the only thing I really care about at the end of the day is to have this moment where you encounter this thing and it's just really difficult to like grab mentally for at least a minute, and then eventually you start to get familiar with it, and then that changes maybe, or maybe it continues to be strange, but this kind of alienness of an object is like pretty much, I think what it does is it kind of like jolts you out of your skin for a minute, and that's really like a good feeling.
It's like you're using these contexts, whether it's the aliens, whether it's the U.S. military, it's almost like these entities are sculpting your object.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there's something very kind of literal to that effect happening in this piece, right?
Right, so it's funny because it looks just like the glide slope, which is kind of something I was interested in, but it's completely different
Just
at the same time.
accidentally. I mean, it's not like...
Yeah, so, I mean, this is Florida Atlantic University, which is this huge campus, and there's all this stuff going on, and they wanted me to do something outside of the gallery, and so I said, well, okay, like, let's build a wall 20 feet high and like 50 feet wide, and just block off the entire hallway. And then, of course, that wasn't gonna fly because this is like one of the main kind of arteries where students have to walk and so on and so forth. So the whole thing was based around this negotiation with the buildings and grounds people and the administration of like, how much of a thing could I put in this hallway? And they, I made a big drawing and then they started hacking away at it and like saying, okay, well, it can only be this high and you have to cut it here and so on. And then this is the shape that we kind of ended up with, like the compromise shape. And
like
then
the code people carved it for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And then the staff built it, and then I asked the gallery director, I brought in a whole bunch of colored chips from Home Depot, and then we just threw them on the floor and asked them to pick a color, and then that's what we ended up with.
Mm-hmm. And it's, you mentioned how it has this resemblance to glide slope, and how you're interested in that. I mean, I think that's interesting because when you have these two objects separated by a couple years that kind of look similar, it gives this false impression that there's a kind of stylistic tendency in your work.
Yeah, I like
to from one to the other.
like mess with that a little bit for sure. Yeah.
But in fact, like by working with these contexts, what you're doing is the opposite of relying on some sort of personal stylistic approach, right?
Well, it's like more like a field of tension, right? I mean, it's neither one. Like it's kind of like these like concentric levels of stylistic manipulation, maybe. So like, I admit that I have certain things that I like the look of because it makes you kind of like pause, or it has this alien quality to it. So I like to remove myself 2 or 3 layers back from that and then see if I can still kind of like cause it to happen. But also it's...
But it gets to a real defining aspect of your work, which is, on the one hand, it's so diverse. It's really, very, very different, one project from the other. And yet somehow these kinds of, not just ideas, but even certain looks start to carry over from one to the other, and it's almost mysterious how that happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there's threads that I keep going back to, and I think those threads have certain like mechanics or ways that they work, and they can, like for example, like ways of creating large volumes in a space. I mean, there's only a few options, right? There's, I don't know, inflatables, there's sheetrock, there's only a couple of options that can kind of fit within the parameters, so it's about like sort of just tweaking these parameters and then finding ones that you like. And
Like with this project, you were talking about how there's kind of a certain limited number of ways to get an object to lift off the floor.
yeah,
To become vertical.
yeah.
So.
That's like I really like to deal with the like most basic problems, because there's always something good in there, I think.
That's like the most basic problem.
It's the most basic
sculpture
problem, yeah.
specifically. And there's also, if you talk about the most basic aspects of sculpture, there's the relationship to the human body, right? That's one of,
Yeah, I think,
unlike painting, unlike drawing. And this is a work where literally the body is making the object, right?
in this work
Yeah.
that we see here, the need of the body to pass through, and also this great like timed passing of like huge amounts of people kind of flowing around it.
And you mentioned, for example, that the height of, tell them about how the height of the sculpture was determined.
Yeah, well, so if you look very carefully at the sort of the top of the highest point of the sculpture, there's an exit sign. And so one of the things that happened was that
I got to use this.
it needed, yeah, there it is, glowing.
Yeah.
It needed to be low enough that someone in a wheelchair could still see the exit sign. And so that's how that peak was kind of, that was as high as it could go.
So that brings us to another really important strand, which is the relationship to the human body, right? And if we talk about a more recent project, I think it really came out very strongly there, right? Can you sort of briefly just talk about this one?
Yeah, so this was part of Fringe Projects, which is like a temporary public art program in Miami that it's a cool idea. So it's just like, what kind of public art can you make that is like in a short duration? And so this project was a clock that sprayed perfume every hour on the hour.
Right there. And then over here, what do we have?
Oh, the pointer. Right, so if you look over in the left, there's the clock, and then on the balconies of this like historic building, there's 7 55-gallon drums full of diluted perfume, each one a different kind, and there's 7 days, right? So it's like kind of like a calendar as well as a clock. And so every hour on the hour, the clock sprays perfume, and every day the perfume changes. Mm-hmm. And this building happens to be in the perfume/jewelry district. So all the perfume was like this like super knockoff perfume from just down the street.
And then you made this image.
Right, so that's a poster, and it got redistributed to the perfume shops, who then kind of hung it in the window as they would advertise the other perfume. That
It just integrates perfectly into the store.
Yeah, they all were pretty excited about that poster.
So I think we've covered a few of these threads that have run through your work for a long time now. But if we could just come back quickly to the pool. What are some of the reasons why the pool served as your inspiration for this project?
Yeah, so this is Venetian Pool, which is in Coral Gables. And I actually went there a lot as a kid, but it was a rock quarry that was used to build Coral Gables. And then when they were done, they turned it into this like pool, Venetian themed pool. Venice is sinking pretty fast also. And it actually gets drained every day. It's spring fed. So that's something that was kind of like in the back of my mind, for many years. This is a picture.
Quarry.
Yeah, that's a picture of it as a quarry, and you can see these kind of buildings in progress in the background. So I guess that's the story of Miami, right? You bring the labor stuff here to build things, and then when you're done building it, you turn it into a tourist attraction somehow. So you have a rock quarry, well now it's a Venetian themed swimming pool, and so on and so forth. So I kind of wanted to do the opposite with this project, take something, you know, very leisure oriented and then turn it into this kind of like industrial machine in some way. Reverse that. Like, so reverse the formula by which Miami creates itself or something like that.
Mm-hmm. You also thought about, and we talked about Vizcaya a few times during this process, right?
Yeah, I think Vizcaya is another Venetian-themed thing. It also has one of the first pools here in Miami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these famous grottos in here.
Yeah, with grottos.
With their kind of kitschy Greek inspired decor, like the Medusa head. Right?
Yeah, yeah, it's all there. This kind of limestone rock and stuff.
So, you know, it's interesting because the project, at first glance, doesn't look anything at all like the stereotypical imagery associated with the city, but it's still so much about the city. I mean, especially if you grew up here, like Venetian Pool is like, you know, close to your heart, you know. And
yeah, it was important in the summer.
yeah. Well, but sort of on that note, we couldn't resist. You brought up Rosie the elephant today.
Yeah, so for who doesn't know about Rosie the elephant, I think everyone should know about her. She was brought here on a ship because it was too difficult, or there was no way to afford bulldozers, and so they brought her here to clear out Miami Beach. And so she used her trunk and pulled all the trees out and steamrolled everything, and she was a living bulldozer. And then after, when Miami Beach was clear and everything was more or less built, she became like this kind of like tropical tourism mascot. And like this image of like Miami Beach as this tropical place, you know, and there's elephants here and so on, which couldn't be further from the truth. Yeah. Here's somebody like playing golf on her.
Yeah. So it goes from this like context of hard labor, of industry, converted into this artificial image of and fantastical image of leisure and tourism, right?
Yeah.
By the way, in this picture, this one we think is actually in Vizcaya.
Yeah, pretty sure that's in Vizcaya.
So.
Diving into the Vizcaya swimming pool.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, on that note, would anybody like to jump in with some questions here? I mean, please feel free. The first question is always.
I'm going to pass a mic around so we can all hear your question.
Can you hear me? I wanted to ask about that structure. You said it was a glide path in one of your previous pictures. And it reminded me so much of the little paper airplanes I used to make as a kid. And we'd fold them, and we'd sail them around, and they would circle around and fly pretty good. But it's like you had it the upside down way, where it wouldn't fly. And then you talked about you wanted to lift it up off the floor. So could you kind of elaborate on that a little, that idea of the lift? It just went by me.
The lift, lifting the object off the floor? Or? I mean, so like that shape, there's different like pilot manuals, and they say, from the beacon at the end of the runway, and if there's any pilots in the audience, they're gonna tell me that I'm like messing it up, but like there's a certain amount of degrees, like beams that come out of this beacon that are a certain amount of degrees from the end of the runway, and they create this like cone shape, and you've got to keep the plane in that cone shape, and the closer you get to the runway, the tighter that cone has to get. So I took the instructions and I plotted them out in a three-dimensional space, and that's the shape I kind of came up with.
And again, it has everything to do with the body, right? I mean, the way we see is essentially in this kind of cone shape. Our field of vision is shaped exactly like that.
Right. And it's a volume that bodies travel through, and planes, but the planes are carrying bodies typically.
You can't see it here, but in the original object, it had this interesting texture that you created with popcorn ceiling material.
Yeah, it gave it like a extra depth of field, like because the little specks would kind of sort of make it seem like a lot further than it really was. Like if you looked at it from one side, it would get blurry fast.
It created like a gradient.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes.
Nick, it's Tobias, but could you explain a little bit more, or I think why the pool was necessary technically to produce the cast? I think that was a little bit missed.
Yeah, well, actually, I think to begin, the answer to that question is, it really is not essential. Like, you could make these concrete rings elsewhere, but I think that the idea of kind of like hacking the pool or like making the rings come from the pool is what I was really after. I would be curious to come up with something that could only be made in a swimming pool, but that didn't happen in this case. But I don't think that it was an issue for me because, it's kind of this like running your laptop with your hairdryer kind of hack thing. There's this kind of like making it work somehow kind of feeling that I was very happy with. Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed to me, so it's like about unlocking the kind of forms that can come out of engaging a pool.
Yeah, and so like, although those rings could have been made elsewhere some other way, like the forces of like struggling with the pool and trying to get it to do what you want kind of influenced the way that the whole show sort of formed itself,
Yes.
Hi, in your artistic development, I'm just curious, is there any point that seemed to stimulate you or influence you to think in this direction? It's an extension of vision in architecture or sculpture, but what have you studied, when I understand, at Cooper Union? At what point did you start to think in this kind of direction? It wasn't painting or your average kind of art medium?
Yeah, I mean, so like I started actually doing film, and then I was really interested in documentary film, and I started going in this direction of using documentary film to like move through space in like unexpected or impossible ways, and then it kind of hit me one day that, I really should be making objects instead of films. Also because I really didn't care about like putting a linear narrative together like in a kind of film type space. So there was this like sort of flip of a switch, and then I started making sculpture like almost right away. And I still have dabbled in video and stuff, but it really kind of evaporated all of the film ideas that I had into just making things.
So from video or film, you went into sculpture. It's interesting.
Yeah, I was trying to make sculptures with films, and it wasn't working how I wanted it to, so I just switched to making sculptures.
Okay.
Great. All right, well, thank you, everybody.